So welcome to another show of It's All About Shipping going virtual. Under the circumstances, that's basically the only option that we have, but we're bringing together people from around the world, so quite internationally, as per our previous panel. Anna Vourgos, who's based in Cyprus, Director of Aphentrica Marine Insurance Brokers and President of WISTA Cyprus. Andreas Chrysostomou, who's the CEO of Tototheo Maritime and CEO of Marine Fuels Holdings Ltd, who's currently based in the United States, actually, even though regularly he's based in Cyprus. Eason, who is the Editorial Director, owner of Fathom World, writer, editor, producer, and broadcaster, and Mr. Alfredo Serrano, who is the owner of Varuna Consulting and National Director of CLIA Spain. Just to brief the audience in, so we decided after the success of the previous show to have it every 2 weeks, just as a quick follow-up of the current situation and the impact of COVID on maritime and what the next steps forward would be. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for being on the show again and on this panel.
Kalispera, Gina. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening,
everybody.
Or good morning.
And what we're going to try to do today is just engage in a discussion on covering a few topics that have been discussed in the news over the past couple of weeks, and of course encourage anybody who has any input to share and opinions you're free to do so in the Facebook stream. So guys, it's been two weeks since our previous panel. And the situation is obviously still ongoing, unfortunately. But what do you feel that has changed or what has not changed in your environments personally? Anna, if you want to go first, and then the rest can follow.
From a personal point of view, what's changed since 2 weeks ago? I mean, I was thinking about this today since you threw the questions at us yesterday. I was thinking about it and I was amazed as to how much hasn't changed and how much has changed over the same 2-week period, in that we've not made much progress as far as the issues we discussed last week. You know, the major issues we discussed last week about COVID, and as the insecurity continues, etc. At the same time, we rapidly, in these 2 weeks, more rapidly, we've adapted and adjusted into this new norm that we've had to put ourselves in faster than the 2 weeks before. I mean, personally, I caught myself starting to think not about how to react and how to deal with the problems presented in front of me, but I caught myself starting to plan ahead and look into ways of how to deal with the day after and look into ways of how we will adapt further and become more agile into dealing with whatever situation is presented to us, as in, you know, looking into the future, whereas 2 weeks ago, we were more like focused here in front of us to deal with what we had to deal with. So it's more optimistic, it's more, for me it's more optimistic, it's beginning to become more creative in a way, in terms of the future.
True, Anna. Andreas?
Oh, from my perspective, in relation to what I see as a person where I am trapped at the moment, sorry, things are changing here because the several states are actually opening up. Mm-hmm. And they still follow the guidelines of social distancing, but they ask people to go back to shops. Then you've got people saying, don't go back to shops, don't do that, don't do the other. So I'm not really going to look onto this. That's the United States. But what I found by surprise is that yesterday and today, there is too much action going on in the aviation industry. Mm. We've seen today some new models of chairs that they come out as new designs, so companies that can employ them and have social distancing without doing anything much different, but they have protective material next to you and so on. We also saw from the aviation that some companies, they have changed their planes from passenger to cargo, so they don't lose, they are still within the stream of flying. IATA is working on it. What I don't see, that's not a complaint or a criticism, but we don't see shipping doing anything very fast on that one, about the day after. So maybe in the next few days, we're going to start seeing some articles coming up the next day about shipping as well. I have to say, though, that as Anna said, the rest of the issues we discussed last week, 2 weeks ago, they're still there and they haven't been moved anyway. But I'm hoping that I'm going to see something coming up soon, which talks about the new way that we're going to live in the next 18, 20 months, because this thing doesn't look like it will go out very soon, and how shipping will adapt to that. I know the cruise industry, but Alfredo will talk about that. They're thinking and they're doing stuff, but general cargo shipping, I'm not sure. I'll leave it to you.
Well, maybe from these discussions, we can raise some points that could be taken forward, hopefully.
Yeah.
Craig?
Well, go back to a little bit about, first of all, what Anna was pointing towards when she was mentioning the 2 weeks, the difference between the 2 weeks when we had our last briefing here. It reminded me that somebody once told me that it takes 2 weeks to create a new habit in your life. Mm. So we're now getting used to living in this COVID age. So this has become, in some respects, a kind of new normal for us. So we're beginning now to live in this new normal, and starting, as Anna pointed out, we're starting to actually think ahead now, because we're no longer in a sort of, oh my word, this is exactly what is going on here, and that panic. We're actually now accustomed to this as a kind of new normal, and we're beginning to live our life around it. From my perspective with that, what I found, because I'm in Sweden, we don't have a lockdown in Sweden. We've got a lot of changes. So those headlines that you've seen suggesting that there is no difference in Sweden is totally wrong. There are a lot of changes. There is a lot of stuff that has changed here, but just there isn't any particular strong lockdown. From my perspective, what I've seen is how I'm engaging with everybody else. Normally around this time of year is when everybody's going to conferences, particularly a journalist like me. I'm going around, I'm meeting people, I'm visiting offices, I'm seeing what's going on, I'm getting a pulse for how the industry is changing. I'm having to do that in a different way now. I'm having to talk to people on the telephone, I'm having to call them up, and I know where they are. I know that they're at the end of their telephone. They haven't got an excuse not to talk to me now. So there's a benefit to everything in one way. That's kind of what I was saying. So, but that aside, I do feel that we're building ourselves a kind of sense of, okay, we're getting used to this now. We can survive this. We can actually utilize this in some way. And I've begun to see little little stories where things are beginning to emerge. Like all of a sudden, people are starting to use blockchain in the shipping industry. Blockchain has become something more than just a trendy word. It was beginning to pick up with a number of key trade things like trade lens that Maersk was actively promoting. But I'm beginning to see now that blockchain is becoming, and digital certification has become trusted now because we've had to. And now that we've been forced into trying something, now we've been forced to move out of our comfort zone we're finding that it works, it seems okay now, and we're beginning to utilize it. I know, Anna, you may have found that in the insurance industry, and there's a lot of contractual stuff around insurance and P&I and brokerage and that sort of stuff, but you may have found that all of a sudden you're having to look at things from a digital perspective in terms of contracts and things like that.
Oh yes, I mean we've mentioned that last week. I mean, Lloyd's, the industry of 340 years, is all of a sudden turned from a personal affair into having to do it digitally. So it's completely 180 degrees different, and we do have to do it digitally. I mean, for us being a retail broker, it doesn't change many things because we still work on email, and other than having our meetings with our clients on a face-to-face basis, that's what's changed. I'm grounded. I can't travel to bring business. Neither can my partner. But the actual placing of the business is electronic. What's changed is actually in the mecca of the insurance market in London. That's changed dramatically. And yes, people do realize, the industry does realize that it was a bit dinosauric in some ways pre this. So they do need to embrace it like I did 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and I also noticed, we touched on the IMO a second ago. I already saw a story in a publication that suggested that the IMO is actually looking at how it can create remote committee meetings. So things like the MEPC, MSC, can one imagine that a United Nations body can go digital? I'm not sure it can. I'm sure there'll be a lot of hurdles to go through to get all those nations, all those member states to be agreeing upon that. That's a long journey. But the fact that that has been muted and is being discussed is an indication of how much we're beginning to trust technology as a communication tool within the maritime industry.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And sorry, Anna, you were about to say something?
I just wanted to say something to this. I read somewhere, I can't remember who quoted this, but I read something that change only comes for two reasons: need and survival.
Yep.
And we have both now. It's a double act.
Yeah.
Very true. And Alfredo from Spain, if you would like to share the input from that side.
Yeah, I think, well, not only about Spain, but also about the cruise industry. I think in general, what we were seeing 2 weeks ago is that, let's say, the cruise lines were very busy in having a safe stop of operations. Of course, they had announced voluntary stop of operations temporarily, but that has, there are still a number of ships which still needed to return to a safe harbor. And of course, there was a big issue of how to repatriate the passengers that were still on board, crew members that might want to disembark, and finally where to lay up the ships for the period and what sort of process needed to be completed on that. So whilst there's still a few things happening there, I think the vast majority of the work has been done. There's no ships which are in operation right now. There's 2 ships which are apparently in crew quarantine, just to make sure that there's no cases, not that there's any concern, but and there's 5 ships which are in port that are still disembarking the crew because it's not being easy to get the crew safely back home. In fact, some cruise lines have decided, since it's so difficult, and imagine what we're thinking about, what the logistic of that implies, is to take their crew and instead of flying them home, whether it's to the Philippines, to Indonesia, China, wherever, to put different nationalities on board one cruise ship, to fill up that ship with crew members and sail there. That's a logistic thing that has never been done. But similar. Imagine what it takes to go from Miami to the Philippines, or from Europe to the Far East. On a cruise ship, whatever, 15, 20 days, or what have you, to be able to safely disembark and maybe make a stop in India and take another one in Indonesia, maybe a third one in the Philippines, and slowly disembark everybody. That, imagine what must have pushed cruise lines to to go to that extreme. But anyway, all in all, I think the interest is shifting from those fighting how do we stop in a safe way and how to minimize the cost of stopping, to things like, of course, how long, how do we minimize the cost of during the layup, and slowly in some markets, how do we plan for the restart of the operations? Still embryonic, they're still in discussion, inside the cruise lines and also within the association. Andreas was talking about IATA. I've seen a document that they've prepared, which is very interesting because it's a good blueprint of the sort of things they're looking into. They're not necessarily saying what they're going to do. They're providing some examples of things that could be done, but I haven't seen this is exactly what we're going to do. I don't think there's enough information about a number of things to be able to answer those questions, but it's very interesting, and I think that their approach is very, very, very interesting. And all in all, I think people, at least in Spain, are recently with this pandemic very fond of making wartime comparisons. And of course, Winston Churchill is one that always is brought to mind. And I remember his quote when he was saying that I don't think this is the end. This is not even the beginning of the end, but probably we're at the end of the beginning of this crisis. And we are seeing the end of this beginning. How this evolves over the next few weeks and months, still hard, because I think there's still a number. I'm in contact with some of the people from the medical profession, and there's still a lot of unknowns about what's going to happen. So of course it's kind of difficult to try to think about what kind of measures any industry is going to take when we don't really exactly know how the problem is going to evolve or what the problem is like. So anyway, very good coordination with health authorities in North America, of course, but also in Europe and in other Brazil and other countries. And be close together with everybody that's involved in the problem to try to come up with solutions that when it is safe, be ready to sail again.
Andreas mentioned earlier, Alfredo, since you touched on it, like the IATA steps or suggestions going forward, do you foresee that from CLIA's side, representing the cruising industry, and maybe the rest can then add on the shipping forefront, the cargo operations, etc.? Do you think we will be seeing something similar?
Of course, there's. I think everybody, it makes sense that every industry does not try to compete based on health matters. It is much more logical that there's certain number of measures or protocols that are shared across an industry, and then of course certain companies may want to go slightly beyond that, or somehow make small adjustments, considering of course their ships, their markets, a number of other things. So I would expect that in every segment of industry, and transport being a part of that. Specifically, if we're talking about international operations, where it makes no sense to try to apply national standards, in my opinion. So yes, I do think this is something that will be seen. I had heard rumors that perhaps there might be some IMO-led, initiatives, but I haven't seen anything concrete. I can say that, of course, when you talk about the cruise industry, we have two sides. We have the shipping side, but we also have the tourism soul. So we have two souls. I can say that from the tourism side, and of course, IATA is part of that. There's a number of things happening. UNWTO is working on that. They published 2 weeks ago. We participated in that kind of general, how to say it, guidelines about how to approach the crisis. They were a little bit generic, but very interesting, with good insight. And they announced this week that they're going to be working on another project where it would be kind of a pilot test of how a destination can restart operations eventually, tourism operations I'm talking about. So they will be working with the Kingdom of Spain as a first trial, but with the idea that could be later extended to other markets, tourism markets that may want to share of what has been learned there. So there's a lot of cooperation going on in different associations or different international bodies.
And I think we will be seeing much more. I know there was something that you wanted to add on this.
Well, I just wanted to go back to Andreas' comment about the aviation industry beginning to adapt and adjust, and as opposed to the shipping industry. But we need to remind ourselves that the aviation industry has always been more agile than shipping. Shipping, unfortunately, is less agile in that respect. If I may say, you're comparing, I think, an Impala with a Rhino. In that respect, that being a heavy industry as it is,
You got comparing what?
Sorry?
You said
It's like comparing an agile Impala with a heavy, powerful Rhino kind of thing. That's how I see airplanes and ships. Ships, when all this started, I think shipping was highly infected. Starting from trade in China, and then ships were they're engaged in longer voyages, longer charters. If we take the merchant shipping, they stay longer in ports as opposed to how long the aeroplanes stay in airports and how long an aeroplane can be repositioned. An aeroplane can be repositioned very fast compared to a ship. So a ship owner that has a ship without employment in the Persian Gulf and wants to take it to South America, that's a very long voyage. So by default, it takes the shipping industry much longer. We still have the issue of the crew changes that despite the efforts of the IMO together with the ICS, with IATA that came on board, it still hasn't produced any tangible results, and that is it's in itself putting the pressure of that is putting the situation on hold. On the other hand, with most aeroplanes on the ground, with inland transportation also being restricted across Europe, across most countries in Europe, I think shipping is probably the means of transport that is going to step in and resolve that at the moment, because you can't take a container or a trailer to Piraeus, offload it, and then off it goes to Holland. It's going to go all the way around to go up to Rotterdam, so it will adapt. It's got no choice because it's an industry and it has to adapt eventually, but it will take longer.
If I may add to that, the comparison I was doing, it wasn't to say that the aviation is doing something and we don't do anything.
No,
it's
I understand.
Within the 2 weeks that passed, I like what I saw, the innovation of the paraphilia industry connected to shipping. And as Greg already said, in my part of the industry, the digital world is adapting completely now to give more equipment, more devices, more ways for shipping to adapt to this new era. But since I have the microphone, there's one thing that we have to start thinking. Cruise ship is one thing. Then we have the passenger ferries, which again, we have to start thinking completely different there, because we definitely need to introduce social distancing, I guess, if we have a small crossing or whatever. So, and of course, is the other modes of transport that Anna just mentioned that they don't do any work anymore. So you have to find ships to carry the cargo around several areas and in a longer time. But for me, I think what we need to start seeing soon is some action about, first of all, resolving this issue with the crew changes. It has to be resolved very quickly, because now we see countries opening up their own internals. How can they not accept their own crews returning home, or how they cannot accept a crew to go from the port to the airport, and so on and so on. Yeah. So that's one of the things I would like to see happening very soon.
Actually, just adding from that, I mean, as Alfredo mentioned, the cruising industry is actually using the cruise ships to try and accommodate and put all the seafarers and transport them, which, I mean, the burden is already too much for the seafarers. It's already been too long. And if there's no other way going forward, I think that would cause an even greater impact.
Yeah.
I'll just add something there as well, because like Andrea said, I saw a announcement from India, for example, that they're allowing crew changes on Indian ships in Indian ports. That in itself, we've got to recognize that in itself is a fairly good step, because at least India now is recognizing the importance of seafarers to their own economy and the need that they have. It's only a matter of time before that percolates outwards and they begin to realize that they need to have that discussion with the airports as well. To get crews off of ships in one country over to another country is not just up to the shipping departments of national administrations, it's not up to the ship managers, it's up to the countries themselves to say, this is how we are going to create international travel in a safe way under these COVID times. So they need to be able to have that discussion. I haven't seen or heard of any international discussions at that level about how key workers can be treated internationally. There's a lot of work and there's a lot of calls and there's a lot of recognition about key workers on a national level, but there needs to be that discussion about international key workers on an international level, so that it allows key workers that need to travel internationally to be able to do so.
I think that the first step is defining the seafarers also as key workers, and I think following the letter maybe of the ICS obviously, and joining forces with the ITF, that might be a step in initiating these discussions. Andreas, I think I cut you off before, and maybe you would like to add on you were discussing the seafarer and resolving the seafarer crew change issue.
No, I think we mentioned it last time as well, and as what Craig says, it involves many different departments which are alien to shipping nationally, and those national authorities, they need to meet together with the other national authorities in an international way to find the international way of resolving this issue. There is, how can I say, there will be a seafarer required from A country to be in B country for the trade of a C country. We need to find a way to do that. And of course, we understand we're not doctors, and of course, we cannot give any advice how you resolve that. But at least those that they are experts on the virus, they need to advise us how we can do it. One of the last thing I wanted to add, the other problem we are going to see becoming more increasingly a little bit confusing in the next few weeks. There are more and more tests done on the virus, and there are more and more different views coming out. What kills, what maintains, and who hosts the virus. I mean, today I was reading some local newspapers, and I found 7 different conflicting studies. The one who says that the virus cannot live in the worm. The other one says the worm kills it. So we will have that. As long as we have this conflict, we cannot accommodate, or we are not going to be able to get all these international people get together and find a common solution. But it's required, and it's required very quickly.
Sorry, Anna, you were saying something?
At least in Cyprus, if I can speak for Cyprus here, I know that there have been and there are ongoing continuous discussions with the government. Our shipping deputy ministry is from day one very much hands-on on every situation, doing everything possible, extending licenses, conveying to the government on our behalf what the needs are, what the problems are, and they are being addressed and they are being heard. But as Andreas said, it's not just about us. It's not just about our government recognizing that they need to allow key workers to travel, and key workers, not just crew. I mean, we're talking about superintendents. We're talking about, immediate need to reposition people, to place people where they need to be for the industry to move. So irrespective if we get a, yes, we will allow your key workers to travel, whether they're crew or shore crew that need to be repositioned elsewhere to attend the company ships and or make sure they attend the surveys or attend dry docking. If that other third country doesn't give the okay, then nothing can be done. So it takes a lot of coordination, and to resolve a problem, you need to understand the problem. And as Andreas said, we have different and conflicting views now, and reports and feedback coming from the health experts and authorities and epidemiologists, if that's the correct way to spell the word. And therefore, all this, we need to rebuild the faith in the government that what we are asking and what we need is actually safe enough for them to agree to. And for as long as they're getting that conflicting feedback, especially the the speculation that there may be another wave in autumn. And with the World Health Organization taking a position that travel may be banned until the end of the year, I mean, how is that going to help with our efforts on trying to get people moving?
Exactly. Alfredo, is there something further that you would like to add on this situation of the travel restrictions and crew changes?
No, not really. I think you covered it very much. No, I think it's all out there. Nothing I can add at this point.
From the cruise, because I mentioned earlier, based on what you said, actually, that cruise liners are now taking action themselves, basically, because they have no other option, which this action is actually quite an expensive option and a very time-consuming option. What are the vibes for the industry in having to take? Is it out of frustration of not having another choice? Is it out of need? How would you assess that?
I think it's probably the most pragmatic way. I think cruise lines. I think we proud ourselves of taking care of the people first, and that of course is the customers, but it's also the crew. Those people, some of the crew we have on board, they've been on board for a long time. It wasn't very clear when there would be a horizon, when when possibly they could go back home. And I think it was probably, I was not part of the discussion. This was of course decided by the different cruise lines, so each one might have a different reason to do it. But obviously, I'm sure that paramount, it was the well-being of the crew who wanted, of the seafarers who wanted to get back home. And of course, we will see how we get those ships back to the area where they will be trading. And that might take some time, but I think cruise lines will think about that afterwards.
True. Another important aspect that I think we should touch on, so leaving from the crew side and the crew changes, coming down to the shore-based businesses, do you think that now it's almost probably we're almost going into 2 months of this lockdown and most of us working from home, so do you think that has had an impact on the normal business operations of companies, of employees' well-being?
I think when we're talking about let's say the shipping and port ecosystem, I'm sure there's at least for the cruising sector, I'm sure there's a lot of companies who are small and medium-sized enterprises who are probably suffering very much. There's been no activity for the last month and a half. It is not clear when it will be activated again, and those companies are getting absolutely no cash, and of course they have a number of fixed costs. In the case of Spain, of course, there's some grants, subsidies, and loans, and what have you. The port authorities in the transport ministry in Spain issued this week a royal decree by which they were providing some relief to those companies, but I'm afraid it will probably not be enough. So we have to think that when we do start operations again, we are going to need all those companies, all those professionals to help us. And I don't know if they will survive, quite honestly. it's going to be quite challenging for them.
True. Craig?
Well, like I said earlier, it's here in Sweden, there are changes, but I've always been working from home, and I'm a one-man, very small company, effectively. But I have seen how the way other people react with me as being a significant change. And when I talk to people, there's little else they want to talk about other than the current situation. Even when I talk to kind of environmental lobby groups, they're pointing to how the situation is benefiting the environment. When I talk to the ship managers, they're talking about their ship's crew. When I talk to the legislators, they're talking about how they're trying to respond to what's going on. So it's 100% the conversation at the moment is this whole situation that we're under. And I do feel, like I said earlier, that there is an element of becoming comfortable in our lockdown. It sounds really weird, but we're not comfortable in the lockdown, but we're becoming a little bit more used to it. And so we're able to sort of, we get a feeling that, yeah, we can survive this because being in this situation is something that we can live with effectively.
If I may add on this one, I fully agree that the shore side is able to adapt to work quite easily, but not all of the shore side. We have to also understand that the companies from shore, they have the technical staff, let's say like me, or like Craig, or like Anna, but we also have the administrative staff. And drawing from parallels in the past, from let's say the SARS lockdowns that they have in certain countries, some people, they do get phobia, and we might see an absenteeism from these people because they will be scared to go back to work, not in the immediate future, but even 6 months afterwards. And I will ask everybody, if you can, there is a Belgium site called everyoneok.be, which actually analyzes on this kind of dogma and try to get people reading stuff and get away of their fears or any scareness they might have. And that, I believe, might cause this problem on the onshore side, because the rest of us, a superintendent, a technical person, usually goes around with their laptop, they find a corner, they type their emails, they connect to their class societies, whatever, and they do their job. But there are other people that we need to start the economy within our onshore companies, that we might have a problem where we have to start thinking about the psychological effects of the lockdown.
A very valid point. And maybe from your perspective also, Andreas, strategy-wise, is there something that companies should be preparing for resuming operations now in this respect? Or anything you would like to share on that?
Say that again, sorry, Gina, I lost you here.
I said strategy-wise, maybe is there something that companies should be doing now, preparing for resuming operations whenever that's possible? Or in this respect, while we're still under this lockdown?
I mean, in my opinion, many companies, they have started thinking about that. I think because they're going to need space to create the so-called social distancing within the office, they will find their way to, although they have big buildings, they will reduce the staffing to create distance between the workers the employees within a confined space. And then they will expand on their operations where they can on the remote way, or working from home, or whatever we may call it. But I think people are already start thinking about these things. I think Anna was telling us before, somehow she's doing shifts now in the office and so on. So I presume that everybody does the same. There are other companies that might go completely remote because they have that capacity. They have that ability and that capacity, and it's within their own way of working. But at least a receptionist will be always there, in my opinion. You need to collect the mail, you need to do deliveries, you need to do supporting. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and actually we were discussing this before we went live, so maybe now you can share.
Well, I just waited for everybody to finish, because I always like to observe human behavior in situations like that. And for me, the whole, period that, from the start of self-isolating, then into lockdown, then, closing the office, then, everybody working from home, I've been observing this, and I found that very enlightening. I learned a lot about myself during this time. I learned a lot about my people. I learned a lot about my associates in terms of, because we're all confined in our own individual environments at home, and we've got to function from there. And when we're all confined into situations like that, at some point we'll get that bird in a cage syndrome. And that's when people's limitations come out. That's when people exceed their limits, or they push themselves beyond their limits, and then they snap, they break. The tension is building up gradually and dangerously. In certain people, you can sense that they are very close to breaking point, because yes, they're working and they're supposed to be working 9 to 5 like they're working in the office, but they're subject to their own home environment pressures, how their kids are taking it, how their husbands, spouses are taking it, wives, how maybe their parents, what other pressures they have. The whole spectrum of all this is having an effect on them. And that reflects on how they behave and they conduct themselves when they are expected, when they're carry out the work. All of a sudden people feel insecure because they don't have access to their folders or data or information, and they just they don't trust themselves anymore. They just keep repeating themselves constantly on things, just because they want to make sure they haven't forgotten something, or the distraction didn't make them forget something. And then the other thing is, all this time we've been teaching people, trying for years, as long as I remember, we've been force-feeding people with you've got to learn to work as a team, you've got to delegate, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And then all of a sudden, you're telling them, you're on your own, mate, deal with it. Yeah. Because yes, they are on their own. And trying to do teamwork remotely and keep your team working as a team is extremely difficult. At some point, you also snap and you tell them, you're on your own. Deal with this, like I'm dealing with it. And then, you catch yourself saying, I need to go to work. Bring your people to work. And we started this week daily. I've been going daily. My team in 2 groups. We have the luxury of being in a quite comfortable office, small team. Mm-hmm. And the effect it had on people's productivity and, behavior and enthusiasm and optimism, it was just unbelievable in just a week's time.
Well, productivity, I think that might be quite a challenge, because we're going to also take a transitional period to, come back and be super excited that people are back in the office. And we actually had an interesting comment on Facebook. So they're agreeing with what Greg is saying, that we're getting used to this new norm. But then there's a comment here on discussing how some kind of businesses like tourism, which Alfredo was mentioning earlier, and the cruise industry are not cut out for this social distancing concept or for working from home. So, and also this, they have added that we have to try and use digitalization in a way to better coordinate rather than replace this new norm. So I don't know if you want to make some comments on that.
I can comment.
You can go on. I'll just allow me a second to close the blind because technical issues, the sun is coming in. Go on, Andreas.
What I was going to say is that, there are the comment and the point with Anna. Teamwork is one thing, collaboration via the electronic thing is totally different. You're missing the human element. Oh, how can I do this? And then I move from my desk to the desk next door and I just type 3 things and that's it. We cannot do that on collaboration. We can, but you need to be some kind of more used to the technology to do that. So you're missing the human touch. It's still coming out of this electronic media. On the other hand, the tourist industry, yes, it's on a complete no-go at the moment. And when they come back, obviously things will be different. We're going to see beaches, and there will be one sunbed here, and most probably the other sunbed will be 2 or 3 meters down the way. I mean, it's going to be, we have to accept that it will be completely different. And on the other hand, there's a very good, I can agree very much with the comment that some people cannot do work remotely. Can you imagine a crew member doing his job remotely? We don't have autonomous ships. Or can you imagine a plane flying without a captain? I can imagine it, but we don't have it. So there are people that cannot do their job remotely. And we have to start thinking about them, because those people are either unemployed at the moment or will become unemployed if we continue not finding a solution how we go back to, as much as possible, close to normality.
Alfredo?
Yeah, I think I do agree with everything that has been said. There's a real risk of it depends how long this takes. There's a real risk of losing those jobs and those positions. I've always been a little bit more optimistic than the average on this pandemic, but unfortunately, reality so far has proven me wrong. Whenever I said I was minimized what would be the impact, so I still remain relatively optimistic that we should be able to some of these issues that we are perceiving as will not have very long-lasting influence on us. I mean, we all thought that after September 11, nothing would be the same. And of course, some things have changed. There's higher security protocols in many things, and we take them for granted. But I don't think our way of living, working, etc., has changed drastically. We have accommodated. I think this is a bigger shock that September 11 was, but nonetheless, I don't think the impact would be so big. I may be proven wrong. I think it's too early to tell.
Well, let's hope that you will be proven right.
Yeah.
Craig, is there something you would like to add on that?
I kind of agree with Alfredo. I'm slightly more, I'm feeling positive. But then again, as I mentioned before, I haven't been stuck in my house with my 3 children for 2 months. So that's probably why, as opposed to feeling slightly stir crazy. I do feel that we know that there is an end to this.
I hope the children are not listening to this show right now.
I put a good film on downstairs. It's okay.
Go on. Do share your
I do feel that there is, I mean, there is an end to this. We know there is an end to this. We've seen the signs that indicate that there is an end to this. This is we're human. We're going to get over this. This is what we do. This is what it is, and we are fighting. We've got a range of human abilities, including very knowledgeable experts and scientists who are working to find cures, to find a way for us to return to some semblance of normality. We're being involved in the shipping industry. We are an industry that is slightly on the periphery of everybody's vision, and they don't understand, and most people don't understand what it is all about. There was an article in one of the newspapers, the Daily Mirror, that reflected on people getting slightly alarmed, or certainly curious, about a number of ships that were suddenly anchored off of the coast of Wales, because they didn't understand that there were these big ships bringing cargo into their country. And comments like, "Oh, what are these big boats for? Have they got all the toilet paper that we've suddenly found missing in the supermarket?" So,
well, I think that's an improvement, because they actually now do realize that these ships are bringing something to the country.
Well, if the one thing that we've got a few hundred people in Wales to understand is that their toilet paper comes by ship, great. But my point there is, though, that there is this realization that we need the ships to bring the cargo into the United Kingdom. All countries need ships to one point or the other. there is an end to what's going on here. We can look at the positives. Alfredo said, you know, let's be positive about this. There's a lot of negatives, so let's grab hold of those positives and look at what we can get at the end of this and how we're going to come out of this and what we can build in society that's going to be stronger. One of those, from our perspective, is this growing awareness of we need the goods to get into the countries, and we need those goods to be transported around the countries. Going back to what I was saying, the realization that there are international key workers as well as national key workers. It's an integrated solution that we need there, and it's an integrated awareness that we're going to be building up, and that is what's good. So regardless of the announcement in the newspapers that, wow, there's these giant boats floating off of the United Kingdom, what are they for? At least it's getting people going, oh, that's where our goods come from. And that in one little way is a good thing. So when they start sailing again, when we start seeing everything return back to normal, we can look at that and we can just say, yeah, there was something good that came out of it. And going back to the digitalization aspect as well, that we are being forced to use the tools that we were tending to use because we thought they were good to use or a slight competitive advantage. There was always some company that was willing to do it before others. Now, a lot more people are starting to use it. The number of companies that are using webinar platforms, etc., like Zoom. You know, I don't know if you saw the number of figures about the increase in Zoom traffic. Yeah, it's phenomenal. You know, if I knew the coronavirus was going to hit society and the level of it's done, there are certain shares that I would have loved to have got hold of, including all these webinar platforms and things like that, because it's demonstrated our ability to communicate, at least to continue to communicate digitally, while we look for how we can overcome the situation that we've got, become familiar with it, and then return back to normal. None of this is going to replace our desire to have personal contact. You know, once this is over, we are soon going to be back traveling around, and it's an international industry, wanting to actually meet each other and engage with each other, do business, you know, and that sort of thing. But until then, there are ways that we can get over this, and we are doing that. There are tools to do that, and we are doing that. Well,
I think going back to the statement that you made at the beginning of the show, that the UN body, like I am always considering having it committed digitally, that in itself says quite a lot. And because we're kind of running out of time in wrapping up, any other comments you would like to make before we close? And I don't know, anything that you found particularly interesting over this past 2 weeks?
Well, it was something I touched on very slightly a second ago, and that is the impact that we're having on the environment as a result of the coronavirus in an odd way. I just got an email today about a report in Europe on the reduction of emissions around Europe, because there isn't so much traffic, there isn't so much fuel being consumed, there isn't so much aviation, there's not as many ships coming into ports. I mean, it's going to be a while before we see what the reality of that is, but certainly on immediate emissions like NOx emissions and sulfur dioxide, it seems like there has been a significant reduction in some of those emissions. I think the messaging there, we've got to be very careful how we interpret that, because it's good in one way, but it's not necessarily going to be reflected in the other. And of course, the CO2 picture is not going to change, because CO2 sits in the atmosphere a lot longer, for hundreds of years or thousands of years. So we're not going to impact the CO2 picture just because we see this drop down in economic activity over 2020. The global climate agenda is and needs to be a lot more thought out, and a lot longer, you know, beyond 2050, beyond all those dates, because this sudden change, this forced change in society is not a sustainable one. So to compare what we're seeing here to what we need to achieve, through the Paris Agreement and what the IMO is trying to achieve with its roadmap, those are real long-lasting changes. What we've got at the moment is a sudden change under duress that isn't sustainable.
True.
So we have to be careful when we start, if ever we start talking about the benefits that we saw in the environment in 2020, we've got to be careful about what we benchmark that against.
True. Alfredo?
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with what Craig said. I think this is, I think it's a very interesting angle, how this impact on the environment. And I think we're seeing the first phase of what I think it will help after one of the positive things of this, if you look for any positive things of this crisis, and it's that it will make the environmental debate much more real for, I think, both parties, both the, let's say, the more pro, I don't know how to say it, but more activist and more pro environmental group, and the people also who are in denial. I think for the people who are in denial, this proves that, of course, pollution can be reduced, and I don't know what would be the impact on greenhouse gases, but even if it's something, I'm sure there'll be people who can quantify it and extrapolate it and say, well, this is what it would come. But then we will also see at what cost that comes from an economic perspective and how many jobs will be lost. So I think both parties will, they will realize that you cannot just have blindly reduce the environmental impact without having some trade-offs in terms of jobs and in terms of economic downturn. And on the other side, you cannot deny that we are polluting, and therefore, I think hopefully, there will be, one of the few positive side effects of this is there will be better data on both sides because we are seeing a situation in which suddenly economic activity has stopped or have been greatly reduced. What's the impact on that? What's the impact on the environment? And what is the impact on the economy? And see what. So I think it will be very interesting.
I think maybe also in one of our shows to come, as we're planning to do this every 2 weeks, we should discuss in more detail the impact also, as we will be, having more figures and a clearer picture going forward. And now, Andrea, Anna, do you want to go?
Well, the thing that I would like to hope, 2 weeks ago, I said that I hoped that at the end of this, we will all be a bit more humble than what we used to be. 2 weeks later, now today, I added another wish on my wish list. And I am hoping that people will realize that we are resilient. We are more resilient than we think we are. And we always, if you look at the Earth's evolvement, our evolvement as humans, how the whole planet evolved over the millions of years, we are here because we have adapted and adjusted. And I think that is, I think Craig mentioned that this is what we know how to do best. We will do it. I don't know how we will come out of this, but we will not stand still. We will not just stay in a corner and just pray and wait. We will do this. We will come out of it, and we will appreciate our resilience a bit more than we did.
True, very positive. Andreas, in concluding?
I think, concluding with humanity, I would say we are an evolutionary species and we will continue to evolve ourselves, which is also holds the same for the point of view of shipping. It is an evolutionary industry and it will evolve through this and will become out a winner. But what I also can predict, because this is like, as Isaac Asimov said before, when you predict for a big community, you might have a good prediction, is that we're going to have a new norm. From now on, normality will not be as we used to know it. And we know that from other pandemics that we had before. After the pandemic, people changing behavior, changing customs, changing way of doing things. That doesn't mean it's bad. most probably is what Craig have said. We now find ways to embrace and adapt into things that we haven't even used before. For example, last year, there was a movement saying, don't travel, don't take an airplane just to go on a weekend trip 10 times a month. Now we prove ourselves in a way on that statement that if you don't have so many flights going on every day, you might have reduction in pollution. Of course, not in CO2, that's for sure, that's impossible, but some other pollution. That doesn't mean that I support that notion. What I'm saying is this gave us, the good things coming out of this is that you have time to observe, you have time to reflect for yourself or your industry, you have time to see what other people are doing. And personally, I have been very happy. I love myself. I haven't been out of my house for 4.5 weeks. And I'm very happy about it, which shows that I am either an introvert or I get sick of other people's going around me. But the truth is you find new things. And although sometimes we might sound pessimistic, it's good to know the negatives so you're prepared for them if they arrive and when they arrive. But also we have to agree with the others that we have to see the good things that we might get out of this. And one of them that I really like is eventually we're going to embrace digitalization in any sense and form in the future to come.
Definitely, definitely. And anything else that you would like to add before we close today's panel?
No, fine.
The comments? Okay, so we'll be back in 2 weeks, of course, following up on the situation from different angles of the world as we're located. And
but can we ask our audience if they want something to hear, they can leave it on the comments, and then we can take from their comments onwards. And if they have it as soon as possible, then we can do more research on it if we can.
Exactly. So feel free, Andrea, very, very quick. Feel free, everybody, to put any thoughts or topics that you would like us to discuss. That would be great. We'll put it in the agenda for the next show. Thank you very much, Anna, Andreas, Craig, Alfredo, for joining me again today on It's All About Shipping. And,
thank you, Gina. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And
looking forward to our next session. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
good night.
Bye.